For all his fame and celebration, William Shakespeare remains a mysterious figure with regards to personal history. There are just two primary sources for information on the bard: his works and various legal and church documents that have survived from Elizabethan times. Naturally, there are many gaps in this body of information, which tells us little about Shakespeare the man.
So, what is quantum mechanics? Even though it was discovered by physicists, it's not a physical theory in the same sense as electromagnetism or general relativity. In the usual hierarchy of sciences, with biology at the top, then chemistry, then physics, then maths, quantum mechanics sits at a level between maths and physics that I don't know a good name for. Basically, quantum mechanics is the operating system that other physical theories run on as application software, with the exception of general relativity, which hasn't yet been successfully ported to this particular OS.
As I was saying, Professor Mitchell.
Oh, please call me Lisa.
Yes, well, Lisa, I'm still trying to get my head around the choice of electives for the optional part of the third-year program. I was thinking of taking personal taxation law and company tax, together with the extra 5-credit point course on goods and services and VAT-type taxes, but I'm a bit concerned that I'm going to pigeonhole myself too early in the course.
Yeah,
As you know, there are going to be interviews for summer clerkships coming up, and I really don't want to come across as too focused on certain areas that a lot of firms don't even do, have a practice in.
Well, don't forget, only about 25% of the course at this stage is elective-based, and you'll still have that core of subjects: crim, legal institutions, evidence, property law, general commercial and Fed Con law, all of which would be of interest to a lot of firms. So if I were you, which I'm not, I'd really just go with what my interests are and enjoy the chance to undertake some work in an area that I'm motivated to pursue, don't you think? There's an awful lot of time in this profession where you'll be undertaking long, stressful hours on projects that don't really interest you as much.
Giant exoplanets, like the so-called hot Jupiters, that are similar in characteristics to the solar system's biggest planet and orbit very close to their host stars, are excellent targets for astronomers in their search for their extrasolar worlds. The size and proximity of these planets is easy to detect as they create a large decrease in brightness when passing in front of their parent stars.
So between 4000 and 3000 BC, the Mesopotamian Sumerian cultures do not practice any kind of burial. And then, about 3000, in the early dynastic period, these burials start to reappear, and they reappear with a certain amount of conspicuous consumption, and this is the context for the royal burials at Ur. Okay, so, the royal cemetery consists of quite a number of pits, so these are the excavation workers who are coming down into the pits. So you get some sense of how really deep and how really difficult it was to construct these chambers.
Green chemistry is a concept designed to develop technologies which allow chemistry to be practiced with minimal damage to the environment, or in an environmentally compatible way, and it's meant to cover both chemical processes and chemical products. The center was set up about 7 or 8 years ago, and the idea was to provide a hub of activities that covered fundamental research work, international collaboration, but also educational development on public understanding of the project as well, and also networking, so we network out to well over 1,000 people around the globe.
The thing that makes it difficult is because even if life had evolved on Mars, the chances of it being preserved are very small. If we use Earth as a reference and our planet is teeming with life, yet it rarely preserves evidence of life in the fossil record. And the focus now is on exploring for habitable environments. You're looking for water, a source of energy, either solar energy or thermal energy or chemical energy, and then organic carbon, assuming life as we know it on Earth based on carbon. So those are sort of the three things that we're looking for in the course of our mission.
In this tutorial, we will show you how to find specific journal articles using the library catalog. The university subscribes to over 18,000 journals across a variety of subjects, most of which are available electronically to find a specific journal article using a library catalog. We need to search by the journal name as individual article titles are not listed in the catalog.
Belief is the human capacity to imagine, to be creative, to hope and dream, to infuse the world with meanings, and to cast our aspirations far and wide, limited neither by personal experience nor material reality. Believing is a commitment, an investment, a devotion to possibilities. Beliefs permeate neurobiologies, bodies, and ecologies, acting as dynamic agents in evolutionary processes. The human capacity for belief, the specifics of belief, and our diverse belief systems shape, structure, and alter our daily lives, our societies, and the world around us.
Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge.
Doctors have been concerned for a long time about people Googling their symptoms. There's this term, Dr. Google, which is really frustrating to a lot of physicians, because people come in and think that they know what they have without having the actual expertise or context, just by having looked up, I have a headache. What does it mean? GPT software is much better at actually being accurate in determining what patients have and asking sometimes follow-up questions that will help it further hone in on the correct diagnosis. Companies are starting to study this. And preliminary research suggests the ICE are surprisingly accurate. Studies have shown that they work better than online symptom checkers, which are websites that let you input your symptoms and spit out a diagnosis. They're also better than some untrained humans.
For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has cast some doubt on this principle. After all, the authors of the report argue for culture. A company's build-up may be strong, but wrong. There is little point in every employee marching to the same tune if they are all marching in the wrong direction.
We are trying to understand the locomotion of one of our closest living relatives, which is the orangutan, and also the locomotion of all of the apes and the common ancestor of humans and the other apes. And in that area, we have had a big problem traditionally, and that we know a lot about how they move around the forest. I've been out to the forest and spent a year recording the different types of locomotion they use, but we have no idea about the energetic cost of how they move around the forest and the solutions that they find to problems of moving around the canopy. And what we're doing here is using the parkour athletes as an analogy for a large-bodied ape moving around a complex environment and getting them to move around in the course that we've made that they've never seen before. And we're going to record their energetic expenditure while they're doing it.
I'm going to argue that the tremendous increases in productivity that we associate with the Industrial Revolution originate not so much from changes in science or technology or new inventions, where England was far from unique, as from changes in attitudes towards morality, towards what constituted the good. Attitudes towards property, which became in England individuals long before it did on the continent. Attitudes toward the proper role of government. And together, these attitudes constitute much of what the Luddites were protesting against.
I think that's not going to be such a viable option for Cerberus, but that may be the way that they're going to approach it. Private equity, of course, is supposed to have the advantage of taking management out of the spotlight of quarterly profits and industry analysts, and prying shareholder eyes, and that, hypothetically, gives them a chance to take slower, more patient routes to doing something to turn a company around. I would hope, and I have some, I guess, optimism that some of the Cerberus team will have some creativity and imagination. Perhaps you remember the dire predictions from the analysts. The fall-off in housing threatened to drag down the entire economy. High energy prices put the kibosh on consumer spending. Runaway inflation was poised to take off. David Wyss is an economist at Standard & Poor's. He says in the end none of those things happened in the final 3 months of last year.
My hero is Marie King Soldiers.
So in a very important tense, memory is the cognitive function that stores knowledge that we've acquired through learning and perception, but also memory is important because memory frees our behavior from being controlled by the present stimulus environment. If you didn't have memory, all you'd be able to do was react to whatever is currently in the environment now, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But memory allows us to respond to past events as well as events in the current stimulus environment. And memory also gives us the means to reflect on our experiences so that we plan for future encounters. Adidas teamed up with an organization called Parley for the oceans. Parley goes out and collects plastic waste from the ocean. Adidas uses the plastic waste to make shoes. Shoes made with plastic from the ocean. Good for the environment and good for business. Because if you know that rapidly growing consumer segment known as hipsters, and I know you know hipsters, then you know that a hipster faced with the choice between a no-name shoe and an Adidas made with plastic from the ocean will pick the Adidas every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and then walk around like it's no big deal but look for every opportunity to talk about them. So 2 decades later, what's changed? It's now widely recognized that just 20% of health outcomes are tied to medical care, whereas up to 70% are tied to healthy behaviors and what's called the social determinants of health. Basically, everything that happens to us for that vast majority of time when we're not in the doctor's office or the hospital. Healthcare executives now routinely remind us that our zip code matters more than our genetic code. And one healthcare publication even recently had the audacity to describe the social determinants of health as the feel-good buzzword of the year. What was interesting and revealing about younger and middle-aged views on old age was how relative these were to the individual's own age. Those in their teens regarded 40 as old, whereas those in their 40s thought 70 or 80 was old. For many, health was seen as a determining factor in deciding who is old, and many young participants commented on how fit and active their grandparents are, while others thought ill health and dependence were an inevitable part of aging. The majority of participants, however, regarded old age as something negative, and many expressed fear of growing old. Lead in time is the amount of time that elapses between a business placing an order with a supplier for more stock or raw materials and the delivery of the goods to the business. Businesses want the lead time to be as short as possible, so that they can meet their customer orders and minimize the time between paying for the stock and receiving the feedback from the customer. However, this may not happen due to a number of factors, such as delays in the supplier receiving the order, or the breakdown of the supplier's lorries delivering the stock to the business. The earlier chocolate was quite unpalatable. They used to add things to it to make it more palatable, so for the early chocolate, they didn't know how to extract all the cocoa fat from it, so it was, or could be quite greasy, and if you made it as a drink you'd have this sort of scum on the top. So they used to try and add things to it, like starch and things, to make it a more palatable product. So there were a lot of scandals around the kind of things they were adding to chocolate in the 19th century. So by the sort of 1870s, 1880s, there are people like Cadbury's saying, "Our chocolate is absolutely pure. We have this new process, the Van Houten process, which now extracts all this horrible fat that we can use to make eating chocolate. Now we have a pure product." So, palm oil is the most widely produced oil crop currently. It's used in a wide range of industries, including food for biofuels and in soaps and shampoo. However, those sectors growing fast, and unfortunately palm oil grows in exactly the same environment as tropical rainforest. So, the use and the development of palm oil, the growth in the sector, is leading to wide-scale deforestation. What we are hoping to do is, if we can come up an alternative, we can slow the growth of the sector and therefore stop the wide-scale deforestation in South Asia. We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we've divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a mid-term. The first one is about matter. One seminal difference in policy remains: the coalition has not matched what is Labour's most important innovation promise. That is to bring together responsibilities for innovation, industry, science and research under one single federal minister. Innovation responsibilities currently lie within the powerful Department of Education and Science, and while there is a separate industry department, it has little influence within cabinet. This has hampered policy development and given Australia's innovation policies a distinct science and research bias. It is the scientists rather than the engineers who call the tune in innovation policy in Canberra, so it's no surprise our policies are all about boosting government-funded research and later commercializing their results. Life in the UK 2012 provides a unique overview of well-being in the UK today. The report is the first snapshot of life in the UK to be delivered by the Measuring National Wellbeing Programme and will be updated and published annually. Well-being is discussed in terms of the economy, people and the environment. Information such as the unemployment rate or number of crimes against the person are presented alongside data on people's thoughts and feelings, for example, satisfaction with our jobs or leisure time and fear of crime. Together, a richer picture on how society is doing is provided. All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are threatened by pollution, neglect, carelessness and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage. You might picture Neanderthals as cavemen gnawing on bones around a campfire. Which wouldn't be inaccurate, but Neanderthals may have also dined on roasted vegetables and known a bit about medicinal plants too. So says a study in the journal Naturwissenschaften, The Science of Nature. Researchers analyzed hardened dental plaque from 5 Neanderthals found in El Sidrón Cave, in northern Spain. Yes, 50,000-year-old dental plaque. And they found a lot lurking between the teeth. Like evidence of nuts, grasses and green veggies, chemical traces of wood smoke, and tiny, intact starch granules, proof Neanderthals ate their carbs. And in one individual, they detected compounds found in the medicinal herbs chamomile and yarrow. The herbs have no nutritional value, and since Neanderthals did have the gene to detect the herbs' bitter taste, the researchers speculate that the cave dwellers were munching on them not as food, but to self-medicate. Not too far-fetched, they say, because primates like chimps also use medicinal plants. Luckily for the scientists doing this detective work, Neanderthals may have known a thing or two about medicine, but they didn't get regular checkups at the dentist.
Dogs aren't just man's best friend. Previous studies have shown that kids with dogs are less likely to develop asthma. Now a new study may show how, if results from mice apply to us. The work was presented at a meeting of the American Society for Microbiology. The study tests what's called the hygiene hypothesis. The idea is that extreme cleanliness may actually promote disease later on. Researchers collected dust from homes that had a dog. They fed that house dust to mice. They then infected the mice with a common childhood infection called respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV.
Obviously, this is all relevant to your final assignment. So we're going to talk about it. So until today, we've gone through face-to-face interviews as the main sort of part of interviewing the window. Today we're going to have a look at going to use an email and why they work, why they don't necessarily work, and what are the challenges and some of the things that we need to be understanding, when we are completing such interpreters. So let's start with the foreign one. Obviously, there are a few benefits to them, and they are listed there up on that slide. It's obviously less stressful for those of you who might be a little bit anxious about interviewing. It is about 100 years since that great Canadian-born physician Sir William Osler, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, complained about the increasing influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the medical profession. He would be turning in his grave at the way the industry now dominates doctors' prescribing habits. It does this not only by direct and indirect pressure on the doctors themselves, but also by encouraging the public to ask for scripts. And one particular crop, almond, in the US and now in Australia, is transforming the world of beekeeping and bees. What has happened is that something serendipitous came along that people found out, that doctors found out that almonds are good for you, a confection but it's good for you. The Almond board got a very aggressive promotion going on for almonds. They actually, I just heard recently, send out sales reps to cardiologists at hospitals to promote the heart benefits of almonds. In a very good promotion of almonds, and it's legitimate promotion because they are a healthy food. Well, the simple explanation might be that yesterday's sudden drop in share prices pretty much across the board has created what market analysts like to call a buying opportunity. It tends to bring out investors to pick through the ruins, looking for bargains. Decision by investors that sellers got a little carried away with things, so the buyers have lifted all the major indexes today. The Dow, the Nasdaq, the S&P 500 were all up around 0.5% in early trading today, and that wasn't a big surprise. The sell-off continued somewhat. Overseas European markets remain fairly weak, along with many of the Asian markets. But you'll remember that all this started with a big plunge of around 9% on the stock market in Shanghai. Well, Chinese rebounded by around 4%.
My current research at the moment is really quite broad. I work at the interface between the arts and humanities, particularly archaeology, but trying to find questions which are difficult to answer unless you start integrating computing and visualization. So really I work in this boundary between trying to understand cultural questions about the past, but those sorts of questions that you can't address unless you start reconstructing, start modeling and visualizing past landscape objects and movement of people.